You've read thousands of these files. You know how to stay detached because it's the first thing they teach you, and you've spent 11 years getting good at it. You learn to hold the worst things human beings do to each other at arm's length, and then you do your job. But when you look at his face, you recognize it. Not from a mugshot, not from a filing, from a photograph on your mother's mantle, from the last time you saw your brother alive. You didn't go to law school to become famous. You went because your father told you the law was the only thing standing between ordinary people and the raw power of the state, and that if you didn't believe it, you shouldn't walk through the door. It was one of those things he said that you filed away at 18 and only really understood at 32. Your brother Marcus believed it too. He was 3 years younger than you and about 40 times louder. He coached youth basketball on Tuesday evenings and argued with you about everything from politics to whether cereal goes before or after the milk. And he was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and actually called them, not texted, called. He was 29 years old when he was killed during a carjacking that went wrong on a Thursday evening in February. The man who did it was caught 4 days later. His name was Darnell Reeves. He was 23, with 2 priors for possession and 1 aggravated assault charge that had been pled down to simple assault. The gun went off. Your brother didn't survive. The state charged Darnell with second-degree murder. The public defender's office, which was drowning under its caseload, the way every public defender's office in every city drowns, needed someone to take the case. They called you by mistake. Nobody tells you that the turning points in your life don't announce themselves, that they don't feel historic in the moment, that sometimes someone just calls the wrong number and you happen to pick up. The supervisor was apologetic. There had been a clerical mix-up. Your firm had been flagged for pro bono intake. Your name had gone into the rotation, and by the time anyone caught the conflict of interest, the appointment had already been sent to the jail. He told you they'd find someone else. You sat with it for 3 days. Your mother told you not to touch it. Your best friend from law school, who does corporate mergers now and has never quite understood why you still do criminal defense, told you it was insane. Your therapist asked you carefully what you thought you were trying to prove. 11 years of doing this work had taught you that the reasons you shouldn't do something and the reasons you have to do something can look exactly the same from the outside. Darnell Reeves had a public defender carrying 140 active cases. His trial was 5 weeks out. The evidence against him was significant, but not airtight. There were procedural questions about the initial stop, and there were witness statements sitting in the file that had never been followed up on. If he went to trial with the representation he currently had, he was going to be convicted, not necessarily because of what actually happened that night, but because the facts were complicated in ways that required real preparation to explain to a jury, and without that preparation, a young man with priors was going to spend the rest of his life in a cage. You keep coming back to what your father said. The law is the only thing standing between ordinary people and the raw power of the state. And he meant everyone. The people you like and the people you don't. The people who've never touched your life and the people who've destroyed it. You called the supervisor back on a Wednesday morning and said you'd take it. You had no idea what you were actually walking into. The first meeting is worse than you expected, and you had expected it to be devastating. Darnell Reeves sits down across from you and does not know who you are. He doesn't know your brother's name. Now, he doesn't know that the man he killed had a lawyer for a sister who coached with him on weekends. He looks scared. That's the part you weren't prepared for. You had spent 18 months building a version of him in your mind, hard, cold, indifferent to what he'd taken. Because that's the thing grief requires to make any of this bearable. You need a monster on the other side of it. He's 24, and he looks like someone's kid brother. He looks, if you let yourself see it clearly, a little like Marcus at that age. And that is the kind of thought you were absolutely not supposed to have. And now you can't unthink it. You introduce yourself, walk him through the process, and tell him you have questions. He nods. You ask him to walk you through the night of February 14th, and he does. He's calm and he's thorough, and he doesn't look away from you once. His version differs from the police report in several specific ways. Not in the outcome, not in the fact that Marcus is dead and Darnell pulled the trigger, but in the sequence, in who approached whom first, and in whether the gun came up before or after your brother reached for something in his car. There is a difference in law between a murder that was planned and a murder that happened inside 30 seconds of escalating panic, and that difference is the difference between life and 25 years. And it matters legally whether it matters to you personally or not. And when the session ends and you walk back through those metal doors and get into your car, you sit there for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Because the thing that's breaking you open right now is not hate. It's that you believe him. That some of what he's saying you actually believe. And you are now going to spend the next several months trying to figure out what to do with that. You build the case the way you build any case, one brick at a time. You start with the witness statements, then the physical evidence, then you rebuild the timeline from scratch to see where the official version doesn't hold. The prosecution's case is cleaner than you wanted. Security footage from 3 blocks away puts Darnell's car in the area, his prints are on the door of Marcus's vehicle, and the gun that was recovered 2 days later matches the ballistics. But there are gaps. The witness who first identified Darnell has a prior relationship with a detective on the case that was never disclosed. Now, the timeline of the initial stop has a 7-minute window the police report doesn't explain. And at the edge of the gas station footage, partially visible, there's a second car that nobody has ever identified or tried to. These are the things you find because you're good at your job, because you've spent 11 years learning to read what isn't in a file as carefully as what is. And every time you find something useful, you feel 2 things at the exact same moment. Relief, because it means you can do your job. And guilt, because doing your job means building a defense for the man who killed your brother. Your therapist asks at your next session whether you fully disclose the conflict to everyone who needs to know. You tell her your supervisor knows. She asks if that's enough. You've thought about Model Rule 1.7, the ABA standard, that says a lawyer must not represent a client when there's a significant risk the representation will be materially limited by a personal interest of the lawyer. You've read that rule more times than you can count in the past 2 months. The answer is yes, of course you have a conflict. You are the most conflicted attorney in the room and you know it. But you disclosed it, your client has the full picture, he waived it in writing, and he wants you specifically because, as he told you at your second meeting, he figures someone with skin in the game will actually try. You wrote that down and closed the notebook. Because the thing you can't explain to anyone is that he's right. You are trying harder on this case than you have ever tried on anything in your life. But you're about to find something that is going to make all of that so much more complicated. Her name is Brenda Holloway. She lives 2 blocks from where it happened. The police interviewed her once, briefly, the day after, and her statement is 3 lines long in the official file. She has more to say. She tells you she saw the beginning of the encounter, not the shooting. She was back inside by then, but the first few seconds of it. The man who died, she didn't know his name. She says he got out of his car first and walked toward the other man. There was a conversation before anything else happened. She says she doesn't know what they said. She went back inside because it didn't look like an argument yet, just 2 people talking. She was never asked. 3 lines in the police report, and nobody ever went back. How did you park outside your building and sit in the car for the second time in this investigation? Because what Brenda Holloway has just told you is that your brother may have walked toward Darnell Reeves first. You know what he was like. When something looked wrong to him, he said so. When he saw something that bothered him, he didn't walk away from it. He was brave in the way that sometimes looks different from the outside than it does from the inside, and everybody who loved him knew it. You almost call her, and then you put the phone down, because if you tell her this, she will ask you to bury it. Out of grief, out of love for Marcus, out of everything she has been carrying for 18 months, she will ask you to make it go away. Not because of the rules, though the rules are clear, and not because of your bar license, though that matters too. Because the thing your father put in you is the belief that truth belongs in a courtroom. Even the true things that hurt. Even the true things about your own brother. You put it in the file, and you don't sleep that night. And now, the trial is 12 days out, and someone is about to offer you a way out of all of this. The prosecution offers a plea deal. Voluntary manslaughter, 12 years, eligible at 8. You walk him through it the way you're supposed to, what the offer means, what the trial risks look like, what the range of outcomes is on either side. He listens carefully, and then he asks you something you weren't expecting. He asks what you would do. You tell him, that's not how this works. You tell him it's his decision, his life, his time. You tell him the evidence has real gaps, not that the Brenda Holloway statement creates genuine doubt about premeditation, and that a jury in this city with those facts could go either way. He looks at you for a long moment, and then he says something you write down and keep. He tells you he knows you lost somebody because of him. He says he thinks about that every day. And then he tells you he didn't plan it, but he pulled the trigger, so whatever you think is right, whatever you think is fair, he'll do it. In that moment, he has just handed you everything. The man who killed your brother is sitting across from you and trusting you completely. And you have to decide what right looks like when you are the most interested party in the room. You tell him to take the weekend. Think about his family. Think about who he wants to be on the other side of this. Mom, come back Monday with an answer. He nods. You close your briefcase. You walk out into the cold air and breathe. But you still have one conversation left to have, and you've been putting it off for 9 months. She knew you took the case and she didn't want to know anything else. That was the agreement. But now she's looking at you and she can see something on your face that she's been reading for 37 years, and she asks you what happened. You tell her about Brenda Holloway, what she saw, and the fact that Marcus walked toward him first. Your mother is quiet for a long time. And then she says that sounds like him. She says it the way you say something about someone you love that is completely true, even the parts that cost you. She asks if you're going to use it. You tell her you don't know yet, that if Darnell takes the plea, the trial never happens. But if he goes to trial and you need it, you might have to. She cuts you off. She tells you if you need it, use it. She says your father didn't raise you to hide the truth to protect feelings. Not even hers. She picks up her tea, takes a sip, and looks at the photo for a while. Then she says, he would have wanted you to do your job. Monday morning, Darnell took the plea, 12 years, eligible at 8. Not because you decided for him, because he looked at the evidence, looked at his family, and chose the path that didn't gamble another decade of his life on a jury he couldn't predict. You filed the paperwork. You watched the corrections officers take him back through the door. And then you sat in your car for a while and held a photograph of your brother and cried. You know, people ask whether you regret it and whether taking that case was worth it, whether you'd do it again. Regret is the wrong word for what you feel. You did not come out of those 9 months healed or fixed or at peace in some clean, easy version of the word. You still miss Marcus every single day, and some mornings it hits fresh like it just happened and you have to stand in your kitchen for a minute before you can move. What you came out with is something harder to name, a kind of clarity you couldn't have bought any other way. You know now, in a way you couldn't have known by just believing it, that the thing your father said is true. The law doesn't work if it only protects the people you already love. The word everyone and everyone deserves a defense means what it says, not as a principle you hold at arm's length, but as something you've paid for, something that cost you something real. You sit in this room sometimes when a case is over and everyone's gone, and you think about everything it holds, all the grief that has come through here, all the decisions that changed lives, all the time someone sat at one of these tables, and had to figure out how to be a person when everything in them was pulling towards something easier. You think Marcus would have understood it. You think he might even have been proud. If this story stayed with you, the next video is already on screen. Click it. I'll see you there.